Julian Ashford's private jet touched down just after midnight, but the welcome he had imagined never came. The mansion overlooking the lake sat dark and silent. Minutes later, he found his 71-year-old mother on her knees inside an office building downtown, scrubbing marble floors beneath fluorescent lights. Her cleaning badge carried a last name he had never seen before. Her hands were cracked, her coat was worn thin, and when she recognized him, she didn't run into his arms. She looked terrified and whispered, "Please don't let Vanessa know you found me." The fear in her voice hurt more than the sight itself. Welcome to today's story. If you enjoy emotional drama and shocking twists, don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more unforgettable stories. And before we begin, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. 3 years earlier, Julian had left home believing money could protect the woman who had saved his life. Now, at 42 years old, he stood frozen in the middle of a nearly empty office lobby, staring at the woman he had always called Mom. For a few seconds, neither of them spoke. Elaine Ashford slowly lowered the mop handle and looked around nervously, as if someone might be watching. The fear in her eyes made no sense. "Mom," Julian finally said, his voice cracked. He had spent years building one of the fastest-growing aerospace companies in the world. He had negotiated with executives, governments, and investors worth billions. Yet at that moment, he felt helpless. Elaine looked older than he remembered, much older. The elegant woman who used to host charity events and community dinners now looked exhausted. Her silver hair was tucked beneath a cheap work cap. Her cleaning uniform hung loosely from her thin frame. Julian stepped closer. "What are you doing here?" Elaine forced a weak smile. "Working." The answer hit him like a punch. "Working," he repeated. Why? She glanced toward the security desk at the far end of the lobby. "Not here," she said quietly. Julian took her supplies himself and guided her outside. The cold night air wrapped around them as they walked toward his waiting car. Elaine kept looking over her shoulder. Julian noticed it immediately. She wasn't embarrassed, she was afraid. That frightened him even more. During the drive, he tried to ask questions. Where had she been living? Why was she cleaning office buildings at her age? Why hadn't she told him? Every answer sounded incomplete. "I wanted to stay busy, it helps me pass the time." "I'm fine, Julian." None of it made sense. He had sent money home every month. More than enough money. Enough for comfort. Enough for healthcare. Enough for anything she could possibly need. Yet the woman sitting beside him looked as though she had spent years surviving instead of living. When the car stopped in front of one of the city's finest hotels, Elaine stared at the entrance. "You don't have to spend money on me," she said softly. Julian almost laughed from disbelief. "Mom, I own half the company staying in this hotel." She looked down. That only made him feel worse. Inside the presidential suite, he ordered food, warm clothes, and a medical consultation for the next morning. Only after the hotel staff left did the silence settle between them. Elaine sat near the window. Julian sat across from her. For the first time, he noticed something strange. Her left hand rested on her lap, bare, no wedding ring. The ring she had worn for decades was gone. His eyes narrowed. "Where's Dad's ring?" Elaine instinctively covered her hand. A tiny movement. "But Julian saw it," she said. The answer came too quickly. Julian knew she was lying. Before he could press further, she reached into her pocket and pulled out a worn wallet. A bank card slipped halfway out. Julian caught a glimpse of the name. Not Elaine Ashford. Elaine Carter. He stared at it. "Who is Elaine Carter?" Her face instantly lost color. The reaction was impossible to miss. She quickly pushed the card back into the wallet. "No one. Mom, it doesn't matter. It obviously matters." Elaine looked toward the city lights outside the window. For a long moment, she said nothing. The silence stretched. Julian's frustration mixed with fear. Everything about tonight felt wrong. The fake last name, the missing ring, the cleaning job, the fear of Vanessa. It all pointed toward something much bigger than financial trouble. Finally, Elaine turned toward him. Her eyes glistened with tears. "You came home earlier than expected. What does that have to do with anything, everything?" Julian leaned forward. "Tell me the truth." She opened her mouth, then closed it again. Whatever she wanted to say seemed trapped inside her. Minutes passed. At last she reached across the table and grabbed his hand. Her fingers trembled. "If you love me," she whispered, "promise me something." Julian felt his stomach tighten. "What?" "Don't confront Vanessa yet. His jaw clenched instantly. Why? Elaine shook her head. Not yet. Mom, she's involved, isn't she? Again, silence. That silence was answer enough. Julian stood and walked toward the window, trying to control the anger building inside him. For years, he had trusted Vanessa completely. For years, he had believed everything was fine. Now nothing felt real anymore. Behind him, Elaine spoke so softly he almost missed it. Before you talk to anyone, she said, you need to check something first. Julian turned. Elaine's eyes were filled with fear. Not fear for herself, fear of what he was about to discover. What do I need to check? Her voice barely rose above a whisper. The harbor account. Julian stared at her. The what? But Elaine lowered her eyes and said nothing more. Julian stared at his mother across the hotel suite. The harbor account. The words echoed in his mind, but Elaine refused to explain further. She looked exhausted, as if even speaking those 3 words had cost her something. Mom, what is the harbor account? He asked again. Elaine slowly shook her head. Not tonight. That's not good enough. I know. For a moment, she looked like she wanted to tell him everything. Then whatever courage had surfaced disappeared again. You've been gone a long time, Julian, she said quietly. A lot happened, then tell me. Her eyes filled with sadness. I can't. Not yet. Julian had spent years negotiating billion-dollar contracts. He knew when someone was hiding information, but he also knew when pushing harder would only make them retreat. So he let it go, for now. The next morning he woke after barely 2 hours of sleep. His first call was to his private financial advisor in Chicago. By 8 o'clock, a team was already pulling records connected to every account Julian had funded during the past 3 years. While they worked, he returned to the hotel restaurant. Elaine was sitting alone near a window overlooking the lake. She had showered and changed into fresh clothes. The transformation should have made him feel better. Instead, it made him angrier, because even in comfortable surroundings, she still looked anxious, like someone waiting for bad news. How did you sleep? He asked. She smiled, faintly. Better than I have in a while. The answer hurt. He sat down across from her. A waiter brought coffee. For several minutes, neither of them spoke. Then Julian noticed something else. Elaine kept checking the entrance. Not casually, nervously. Like she expected someone to walk through the doors. Are you afraid Vanessa will find you? Her coffee cup froze halfway to her lips. The reaction told him everything. Elaine slowly lowered the cup. She won't come here. That wasn't my question. Silence. Then she looked away. Julian felt anger rising again, not at his mother, at whoever had made her this afraid. He reached across the table and gently touched her hand. You don't have to protect anyone anymore. Her eyes softened. Oh, Julian. The way she said his name sounded more worried than relieved. Before he could ask another question, his phone vibrated. A message from his advisor. Call me immediately. Julian stepped outside onto the terrace. The call connected instantly. Julian, the advisor said. Something isn't right. His stomach tightened. What did you find? We traced your transfers. And? There were multiple destination accounts. Julian frowned. That shouldn't be possible. It shouldn't, the advisor agreed. But that's what happened. Cold air brushed across Julian's face. For 3 years, he had wired funds into a family management account designed to support the estate, his mother, household expenses, and maintenance. Simple. Transparent, or so he had believed. Where did the money go? Part of it reached the estate. Part? Yes. Julian gripped the phone tighter. How much are we talking about? The number made him go silent. Millions, not thousands. Millions. Transferred through several entities, consulting companies, property holdings, administrative trusts. Some appeared legitimate, others didn't, and one name appeared repeatedly. Harbor Mercy Holdings, the same word his mother had mentioned. Harbor. What is Harbor Mercy Holdings? Julian asked. We're still investigating. Who controls it? There was a pause. That part is strange. How strange? We can't identify a clear owner. Julian stared out across the water. The company existed, money flowed through it, yet ownership records led nowhere. Keep digging, he said. We already are. The call ended. Julian stood motionless for several seconds. This wasn't simple neglect. This wasn't just Vanessa spending too much money. Someone had built an entire structure around his money. Someone organized, someone careful, someone who expected never to be questioned. When he returned inside, Elaine immediately recognized something had changed. You found something. Julian sat down. Mom, who owns Harbor Mercy Holdings? The color drained from her face. Again, exactly as it had the night before. I knew it, Julian said quietly. You know what it is? Elaine lowered her eyes. Please don't ask me that. Why? Because once you start pulling that thread, everything changes. Julian leaned forward. Everything already changed the moment I found you scrubbing floors. Her eyes filled with tears. For a few seconds she couldn't speak. Finally she whispered, I never wanted you involved. Involved in what? She opened her mouth, then closed it again. The answer never came. Hours later, Julian left the hotel alone. He drove directly to the lakefront estate. The mansion stood exactly as he remembered. Perfect lawns, imported stone, massive windows overlooking the water. A home that looked untouched by hardship, which made what he had seen the night before even more disturbing. As he approached the front entrance, the doors opened. Vanessa Bellamy stood there. Her expression froze for a split second. Then the smile appeared. Too quickly, too perfectly, Julian. She rushed forward. You didn't tell me you were coming home. He said nothing. Vanessa slowed. The smile remained, but her eyes changed, calculating, watching, trying to read him. Is everything okay? She asked. Julian studied her carefully. 3 years together. 3 years of phone calls, video chats, plans for a future together, and suddenly he wasn't sure how much he really knew about her. Where's my mother? He asked. A tiny pause, almost invisible, but it was there. I thought she was staying with friends, Vanessa replied. The lie came too easily. Julian felt something cold settle inside him. Vanessa knew exactly where Elaine had been. Maybe not last night, but before that. Definitely, he stepped past her and entered the mansion. The house looked different. New artwork, new furniture, expensive renovations. Vanessa followed him. Julian, what's going on? He didn't answer. Instead, he walked toward the east wing, toward his mother's bedroom, the room that had belonged to Elaine for over 15 years. He pushed open the door and stopped. It wasn't a bedroom anymore. The closet doors were open. Designer clothing lined the walls. Jewelry displays sat under glass lighting. Luxury handbags filled custom shelving. The room had been transformed into a private dressing suite. Vanessa's dressing suite. Julian slowly turned around. Neither of them spoke. The silence felt heavier than shouting. Then he noticed something else. Near the corner of the room sat 3 large black storage bins. Ordinary plastic containers, forgotten, out of place among the luxury. Julian walked toward them. Vanessa suddenly moved. Those aren't important, his eyes lifted. For the first time since arriving, he saw genuine panic on her face. Julian opened the first container. Inside were folded sweaters, family photographs, old books, a framed certificate, his mother's belongings, packed away like unwanted clutter. Then he opened the second container, more of Elaine's possessions, neatly stacked, hidden, erased, and at the very bottom of the third container sat a manila envelope, yellowed, official, legal. Julian pulled it out. Vanessa's face went completely pale. He looked down at the document, then his heartbeat stopped. Across the top in bold letters were the words, Voluntary Surrender of Residential Access Rights, and the signature at the bottom belonged to Elaine Ashford. Julian stared at the document for several long seconds. The words did not change. The signature did not disappear. At the bottom of the page, written in neat blue ink, was Elaine Ashford's name. Vanessa stood several feet away, watching him carefully. For the first time since he had returned home, she looked less confident. You see, she said quietly, I didn't force her to leave. Julian didn't answer. He turned another page. The document had been notarized 18 months earlier. Witnessed, stamped, filed. Everything appeared legitimate, which somehow made it worse. Because if this document was real, then either Elaine had willingly surrendered her right to live in the house, or someone had manipulated her into doing it. Neither possibility sat well with him. Who prepared this? He asked. Vanessa hesitated. A lawyer. What lawyer? Our family attorney. Julian slowly looked up. Graham Porter? She nodded. The name immediately lodged itself in his mind. Graham had worked with the Ashford family for years. He handled estate matters, tax planning, trust administration, and legal filings. Julian had trusted him without question. Until now. He carefully folded the document and slipped it into his jacket. I'm taking this. Vanessa opened her mouth as if to object, then thought better of it. The silence between them stretched. Finally she crossed her arms. You think I'm lying. I think my 71-year-old mother was cleaning office buildings at midnight. Vanessa flinched. That's not fair. Fair? Julian laughed once. It was not a pleasant sound. Do you know what isn't fair? Watching my mother scrub floors while living under a fake name. Something flickered across Vanessa's face. Not surprise. Recognition. Julian noticed immediately. You knew about the fake name. No. The answer came too fast. Another lie. Julian was becoming very familiar with them. Before he could push further, footsteps sounded from the hallway. An older woman appeared near the doorway. Mrs. Dalton, the housekeeper. She had worked at the estate for nearly a decade. Julian remembered her as warm, dependable, and fiercely protective of Elaine. At least he thought he remembered her that way. The moment she saw him, her face drained of color. Mr. Ashford. Julian turned toward her. Mrs. Dalton. The older woman looked nervous, extremely nervous. Her eyes darted briefly toward Vanessa before returning to Julian. That small movement told him more than words could. Someone in this house was afraid, and it wasn't Vanessa. Julian took a step forward. When did my mother move out? Mrs. Dalton swallowed. I don't know exactly. You don't know? Her hands tightened around the cleaning cloth she carried. It happened gradually. What does that mean? The woman looked trapped. Julian could almost see the internal struggle on her face. Then Vanessa interrupted. She wanted independence. Mrs. Dalton immediately lowered her eyes. That bothered Julian. A lot. Because it looked less like agreement and more like obedience. Julian turned back toward the housekeeper. Mrs. Dalton. His voice softened. You worked beside my mother for years. The older woman nodded. Look at me. Slowly she did. What happened? For one brief second, Julian thought she might finally tell the truth. Instead she whispered, I'm sorry. Then she hurried away. Julian watched her disappear down the hallway. His instincts screamed that she knew something important. Vanessa spoke behind him. She's old. This situation is upsetting everyone. Julian didn't respond, because he no longer trusted a single word she said. An hour later, he left the estate carrying the legal document and several photographs of the storage bins. Before driving away, he made one additional decision. He called a private investigator. Not because he enjoyed conflict, because too many pieces no longer fit together. By late afternoon, he found himself sitting inside the downtown office of Graham Porter. The attorney's office occupied the top floor of a historic brick building overlooking the river. Everything inside reflected wealth and stability. Dark wood furniture, leather chairs, framed certificates, a wall lined with legal awards. Graham himself stood as Julian entered, tall, silver-haired, perfectly dressed, exactly the image of a trusted family lawyer. Julian, a warm smile spread across his face. Welcome home. Julian shook his hand. The attorney's grip felt steady. Confident, too confident they sat. Coffee was offered. Julian declined. Graham folded his hands neatly across the desk. I heard you arrived unexpectedly, apparently. The lawyer chuckled politely. I assume you're here about Elaine. Julian's expression remained neutral. Interesting. Graham already knew. Why would you assume that? A tiny pause. Barely noticeable, because she has been going through a difficult period. Julian leaned back slightly. What kind of difficult period? The lawyer sighed, almost sympathetically. Age can be complicated. Julia's tightened. What does that mean? Graham removed a folder from a drawer. He opened it carefully. Several documents appeared inside. Medical evaluations, financial authorizations, residential agreements. Everything looked official. Everything looked organized. Elaine expressed concerns about maintaining the estate, Graham explained. She wanted less responsibility. Julian studied him. And that's why she ended up cleaning office buildings. The lawyer blinked. For the first time, the polished confidence cracked slightly. I wasn't aware she was employed. Another lie, or at least an incomplete truth. Julian could feel it. Graham continued. She voluntarily transferred certain household decisions to Vanessa. He slid several papers across the desk. Signed, witnessed, notarized. Every document painted the same picture. An elderly woman choosing to step away. An elderly woman surrendering control. An elderly woman requesting privacy. The story was almost too perfect. Julian picked up one of the files, then another, then a third. His eyes moved across pages filled with legal language, and suddenly he noticed something, a company name, small, buried inside several financial records. Harbor Mercy Holdings. His pulse quickened. There it was again. The same name connected to the mysterious harbor account. The same name that terrified his mother. Julian looked up. What is Harbor Mercy Holdings? For the first time, Graham Porter completely stopped smiling. The reaction lasted less than a second, but it was real. Then the smile returned. Controlled, practiced, professional, a trust administration company. Julian stared at him. What kind of trust? Several family-related holdings. Who owns it? The lawyer folded his hands again. I'd have to review the corporate structure. A ridiculous answer. Any attorney managing millions of dollars knew exactly who controlled the entities involved. Graham knew. He simply didn't want to say. Julian stood. The meeting was over. The lawyer rose with him. Julian, what? Graham's expression softened, or pretended to. Be careful. Julian narrowed his eyes. Why? Why? The attorney hesitated, then said something that sent a chill through him. Sometimes the people we love hide things for reasons we don't understand. Julian froze. The statement felt deliberate, like a warning. Or a threat. Is that supposed to mean something? Graham smiled again. Just advice. Julian left without another word. 30 minutes later, he sat inside his car overlooking the river. The folder rested on the passenger seat. His phone rang. The private investigator. Julian answered immediately. I found something, the investigator said. What? The harbor company records. Julian sat forward. His heart started beating faster. Tell me. There was a pause. Then the investigator spoke. Harbor Mercy Holdings isn't owned by Vanessa Bellamy. Julian frowned. For a second, nothing made sense. If it isn't Vanessa's company, whose is it? The investigator exhaled slowly. That's the problem. What problem? The ownership records list a beneficiary connected to your family. Julian's grip tightened around the phone. Who? The investigator's voice dropped. The name is Elaine Carter. Julian went completely still. The fake name from his mother's bank card. The same name she refused to explain. And now somehow connected to the company at the center of everything. What exactly are you telling me? Julian whispered. The investigator answered quietly. I'm telling you that your mother may know far more about Harbor Mercy Holdings than anyone wants you to believe. Julian ended the call and remained seated in his car long after the investigator hung up. Elaine Carter. The name kept circling in his mind. For years he had known only one version of his mother, Elaine Ashford, widow of Robert Ashford, respected philanthropist, the woman who had stood beside him through every major moment of his adult life. Now there was another name, another identity, and somehow it was connected to a company that had handled millions of dollars. The discovery should have made him suspicious of Elaine. Instead, it made him more suspicious of everyone around her, especially Vanessa. When he finally drove away from the river, he made another call, not to a lawyer, not to an accountant, to the private investigator. I want everything on Vanessa Bellamy. There was a brief silence. Everything? Family history, business records, financial records, past employment, whatever is legal to obtain. The investigator understood immediately. I'll start tonight. Julian ended the call. For the first time since returning home, he felt something shifting, not clarity, but direction. Someone had been lying, maybe several people, and the only way through the maze was evidence. The report arrived 2 days later. Julian sat alone in a conference room at one of his company offices. The city skyline stretched across the windows behind him. A thick folder rested on the table. He opened it. At first, nothing seemed unusual. Vanessa Bellamy, 36 years old, college graduate, former marketing executive, no criminal history, no major lawsuits, no obvious scandals. Then he reached the section about her family, and the story changed. Vanessa's father had owned a small janitorial services company nearly 20 years earlier. The company had been growing, several commercial contracts, steady expansion. Then one major client pulled out, Ashford Properties. Julian recognized the name immediately. One of the family businesses. The cancellation had triggered a chain reaction. Lost revenue, layoffs, debt, eventually bankruptcy. The investigator's notes included newspaper clippings and public records. Nothing suggested wrongdoing by the Ashford Company. The contract had been cancelled during a corporate restructuring. Perfectly legal, common business practice, but legality and personal pain were not always the same thing. Julian continued reading. Several interviews conducted years earlier painted a clear picture. The Bellamy family blamed the Ashfords, not publicly, not in court, but privately, repeatedly. Julian leaned back. For the first time, a piece of Vanessa's behavior started making sense, not excusing it, explaining it. There was a difference. Later that evening, he returned to the hotel. Elaine was sitting near the balcony, reading a book she barely seemed to be paying attention to. The moment she saw him, she smiled. A small smile, gentle, familiar. The same smile she had always given him. And suddenly, Julian found himself wondering how much he actually knew about her life before she became his mother. The thought unsettled him. "You've been working too much," Elaine said. He laughed softly. "Some things never change." For a few minutes they spoke about ordinary things, the weather, the hotel food. A television show Elaine had started watching. The conversation felt comforting, until Julian noticed something. Every time Vanessa's name came close to entering the discussion, Elaine's shoulders tightened. Every time. Fear, again, always fear. Finally he decided to ask, "What happened between you and Vanessa?" Elaine looked down. Nothing. The answer was automatic. Too automatic. Sighed. "Mom." She remained silent. He walked to the balcony doors and stared at the lights across the lake. "When I first introduced you to her, you liked her." Elaine didn't answer. "You remember?" A long pause. Then a quiet voice. "Yes." "What changed?" Elaine closed the book. Her fingers rested against the cover. For several moments she seemed to search for words. When someone feels judged, she finally said, "They sometimes start seeing judgment everywhere." Julian turned. "What does that mean?" She shook her head. "Nothing." But it wasn't nothing. He could hear it. Whatever had happened between the two women had begun long before he left the country. Long before the cleaning jobs. Long before the harbor account. The wounds were older, deeper. The next day brought another surprise. The investigator called again. "This part isn't in the written report." Julian listened carefully. "Go ahead." "I spoke with someone who knew Vanessa's family years ago." "And?" The investigator hesitated. According to him, Vanessa believed Elaine looked down on her from the beginning. Julian frowned. "Why?" "Class differences." The answer felt too simple, yet the investigator continued. "Your mother came from wealth. Vanessa didn't. Apparently she was always sensitive about it." Julian remembered things he hadn't thought about in years, small moments, tiny comments. Vanessa joking about old money. Vanessa mocking charity events. Vanessa rolling her eyes when Elaine corrected table manners during formal dinners. At the time, those moments had seemed insignificant. Now they looked different, like cracks in a wall he had ignored. That evening, Julian decided to stop gathering information from everyone else. He wanted answers directly from Vanessa. She agreed to meet him at a quiet restaurant overlooking the marina. When she arrived, she looked exhausted. Not glamorous, not confident, just tired. The moment she sat down, she knew this wasn't a social dinner. "You've been investigating me." Julian didn't deny it. Vanessa laughed bitterly. "Of course you have. Then maybe you should tell me the truth." The smile disappeared. Silence settled between them. Finally she spoke. "Do you really want the truth?" "Yes." For several seconds she stared out at the water. When she looked back, there was anger in her eyes. Not explosive anger, old anger, the kind that had been carried for years. "You know what your mother always saw when she looked at me?" Julian frowned. "I don't know. A project." The word landed heavily. Vanessa continued. "She was always polite, always kind, always generous." Her voice sharpened, but somehow she always managed to remind me where I came from. Julian shook his head. "That doesn't sound like her. It happened." "Give me an example." Vanessa laughed again. This time without humor. "You wouldn't understand. Try me." For a moment she seemed ready to walk away. Instead she leaned forward. "My father lost everything after one of your family's companies dropped his business." Julian remained quiet. "I spent years watching my family struggle while people like the Ashfords hosted fundraisers and charity galas." Her eyes glistened. "You know what that feels like?" Julian didn't answer. "Because he didn't," Vanessa continued. "And every time Elaine tried helping someone, every time she talked about compassion, all I could think was how easy it is to be compassionate when you're rich." The confession hung between them. For the first time, Julian saw something beyond greed, pain, resentment, humiliation, years of it. But even then, something still didn't fit. Because none of that explained the fake name, the harbor account, the legal documents, or the terror in Elaine's eyes. "You're leaving things out," Julian said quietly. Vanessa's expression changed. Immediately, she knew exactly what he meant. The silence stretched. Then she stood. "Maybe." Julian rose as well. "Then tell me." For a brief moment she looked almost sorry, almost. Then she said the one thing he never expected to hear. "If you really want answers, stop asking me." Julian stared at her. What does that mean? Vanessa picked up her purse. Her voice dropped to barely above a whisper. Ask your mother why she never told you what your real last name was. Then she turned and walked away, leaving Julian standing alone beside the dark water, wondering if everything he believed about his family was about to change forever. Julian barely slept that night. Vanessa's final words followed him everywhere. Ask your mother why she never told you what your real last name was. The sentence felt impossible, not because he believed Vanessa, but because a small part of him feared there might be something hidden beneath it. By sunrise, he was sitting in a private office inside Ashford Aerospace headquarters. Several sealed files lay on the desk in front of him. He had spent the early morning contacting a family record specialist and requesting copies of legal documents connected to his past. Not rumors, not accusations, facts. If there was a secret, he wanted evidence. The first documents arrived shortly before noon. Most contained information he already knew. Property records, estate filings, tax documents. Nothing unusual. Then he opened a sealed legal packet. His eyes immediately stopped on the heading, Adult Adoption Order. Julian sat motionless. For several seconds he simply stared at the page. Then he read it again and again. There was no mistake. The document showed that 23 years earlier, when he was already 19 years old, a court had approved an adult adoption petition filed by Robert Ashford and Elaine Ashford. His heart began pounding. 19. Not a child, an adult, a legal adult, yet he had never known this paperwork existed, never. He turned the pages carefully. The filing was genuine. Signed, recorded, verified. His name appeared throughout the documents, so did Elaine's and Robert's. Julian leaned back in his chair. The room suddenly felt smaller. His entire life he had referred to Elaine as his mother, because she was. Nothing about that felt false. Nothing about her love felt false. Yet this legal file revealed something she had never told him. There had been a formal adoption, a deliberate choice, a legal decision, and she had hidden it. The realization hurt more than he expected, not because of the adoption itself, because of the silence. The file contained additional notes. Julian continued reading. Most were routine, court references, identity verification, financial disclosures. Then he reached a page that made him stop. A secondary name appeared in the records, not as a parent, not as a witness, not as an attorney, just a referenced individual connected to supporting documentation. Mara Ellison. Julian frowned. He had never heard the name before, not once. The name appeared 3 separate times, then disappeared. No explanation, no relationship listed, nothing. Only a note indicating supplemental records had been sealed. Julian closed the folder. Questions multiplied faster than answers. Who was Mara Ellison? Why was she connected to his adoption file? And why had Elaine hidden all of this? Hours later, he arrived at the hotel. Elaine was sitting near the window exactly where he had left her that morning. She looked peaceful, at least on the surface. The moment she saw his expression, however, her smile vanished. You found something. Julian sat across from her. Neither spoke immediately. Then he placed the adoption file on the table. Elaine stared at it. The color slowly left her face. For a moment, she looked older than 71, much older. Finally, she whispered, I wondered how long it would take. Julian felt anger and sadness collide inside him. You knew, yes. You never told me. Elaine lowered her eyes. No. The answer was simple, honest, painful. Julian struggled to find words. I don't understand. Elaine rested her hands in her lap. For several moments she remained silent. Then she looked at him. Directly. I was afraid of what? Her voice trembled. That one day you would think I only loved you because I felt sorry for you. Julian stared at her. The statement struck him harder than any legal document. I never would have thought that. You don't know that. Yes, I do. Tears filled her eyes, but, she continued, you were already an adult. You had your own life, your own pride. I didn't want you to feel like I was trying to rescue you. Julian's anger softened slightly. Not completely, but enough. Because for the first time he could see the fear behind her decision. Not manipulation. Fear of losing someone she loved. Still, one question remained. He opened the file again. Mara Ellison. Elaine instantly froze. The reaction was immediate, unmistakable. Julian noticed every detail. The tension in her shoulders, the sudden silence, the way her hands tightened together. Who is she? Elaine looked away. No. Julian felt frustration returning. Mom! No, you need to tell me. Her eyes filled with tears again, but this time something else appeared beneath them. Guilt, deep guilt, the kind carried for years. Please, she whispered. Why? Because you're not ready. The answer made no sense. Julian leaned forward. I found you scrubbing floors under a fake name. I found legal documents nobody told me existed. I found a company connected to millions of dollars. I think we're far beyond ready. Elaine closed her eyes. A painful silence settled between them. When she finally spoke again, her voice sounded exhausted. Mara didn't do anything wrong. Julian blinked. The answer caught him off guard. Mara didn't do anything wrong. You still haven't told me who she is? Elaine stood and walked toward the window. For several moments she simply stared at the lake. Then she spoke without turning around. Some debts don't disappear just because time passes. Julian felt a chill run through him. What debt? No answer. What happened? Still nothing. The silence felt deliberate, protective, as though she were guarding someone. Not herself, someone else. Before Julian could press further, Elaine slowly reached into a drawer beside the window. She removed an old envelope, yellowed with age, its edges worn. For several seconds she held it without speaking. Then she handed it to him. Julian looked down. The envelope contained several documents. Among them was an old photograph, not of a child, not of a family gathering, 2 young adults. One was Robert Ashford, his late father. The other was a woman Julian had never seen before. Standing beside them was a third person, a young woman whose face looked strangely familiar, so familiar that Julian immediately sat upright. His heartbeat accelerated. Who is this? Elaine looked at the photograph, then at him, and for the first time since his return, tears openly rolled down her face. The answer barely escaped her lips. That's Mara. Julian stared at the picture, then back at Elaine. Something inside him shifted, because the woman in the photograph looked enough like Mara's name belonged in his family's history. Not on the edge of it, at the center. And judging from the pain on Elaine's face, whatever truth connected Mara Ellison to the Ashfords had been buried for a very long time. Julian held the photograph until the edges bent slightly beneath his fingers. Elaine noticed and reached for it, not to take it away, but to steady his hand. That picture was taken a long time ago, she said quietly. Julian looked from the photo to her face. Why was Mara in my adoption file? Elaine closed her eyes for a moment. When she opened them, the tears were still there, but her voice had grown calmer. Because your adoption was never only about you. The words struck him strangely, not cruelly, but deeply. He set the photograph on the table. Then explain it. Elaine looked toward the lake beyond the hotel window. Morning light had turned the water silver. It should have been peaceful, but nothing in the room felt peaceful now. Robert knew Mara's family, she said, before I married him, before you came into our lives, before everything became clean and respectable on paper. Julian stayed silent. Elaine continued carefully, as though each sentence had to pass through years of guilt before it reached her mouth. Mara was connected to one of Robert's old business partners, a man named Victor Ellison. Robert made a promise to him after a financial collapse destroyed more than one family. He said he would make sure Mara was never completely abandoned. Julian frowned. What kind of promise? The kind rich men make when they feel guilty, but don't want the world to know why. That answer chilled him. He had heard plenty of stories about his late father. Robert Ashford had been respected, admired, and feared in business circles. People called him disciplined, visionary, ruthless when he needed to be. Julian had accepted all of that as part of the price of building an empire, but he had never thought about the people left behind. Not like this. Where is Mara now? He asked. Elaine hesitated. Then she stood, walked to her handbag, and removed a folded sheet of paper. She placed it on the table with the same care someone might use for a fragile keepsake. Her address is there. Julian unfolded it. A facility name appeared at the top. Harbor Rest Assisted Living. His eyes snapped back to Elaine. Harbor. She nodded faintly. That's where the name came from. Julian stared at the paper. Suddenly, the Harbor account was no longer abstract. It was not just a mysterious company buried inside financial records. It was tied to a living person. A woman his mother had been protecting in silence. Why didn't you tell me? Elaine's expression tightened. Because I believed I could handle it. You were scrubbing floors. Yes. The answer came without defense, without shame, and somehow that hurt him more. You were working nights to pay for her care? Elaine looked down at her hands. When the payments stopped, someone had to. Julian stood so abruptly that the chair scraped against the floor. The payments stopped 6 months ago. Graham? Elaine did not answer, she didn't have to. Julian felt the anger return sharper than before. Graham had not simply hidden paperwork. If Elaine was telling the truth, he had cut support from a vulnerable woman and watched Elaine work herself down to the bone to replace it. "I'm going there," Julian said. Elaine's eyes lifted quickly. "No, yes, Julian, please, I need to see her. You don't understand what seeing her might do." "To whom?" Elaine looked at him then, fully, "To you." The warning followed him all the way to Harbor Rest. The facility sat outside the city, tucked behind a small medical plaza and a row of winter bare trees. It was not terrible, but it was not the kind of place Ashford money should have allowed. The brick exterior looked tired. The lobby smelled faintly of antiseptic and reheated soup. A television played softly in one corner, though no one seemed to be watching. Julian gave his name at the front desk. The receptionist looked up fast, too fast. "You're here for Ms. Ellison?" "Yes, she wasn't expecting visitors, I understand." The woman studied him for a moment, then asked him to wait. Julian stood beside a worn armchair and looked around. Everything was clean, but modest. The furniture had seen years of use. The carpet was faded near the hallways. A bulletin board listed meal times, physical therapy hours, and legal aid visits. He thought of the estate, the marble floors, the designer dressing room where Elaine's belongings had been shoved into bins. Then he looked at the facility again and felt something hard settle in his chest. This was not poverty by accident. This was neglect by design. A nurse in navy scrubs appeared from the hallway. "Miss Ellison will see you for a few minutes," she said. "She tires easily." Julian followed her down the corridor. Room 214, the door was open. Mara Ellison sat near the window in a wheelchair, a blanket folded across her lap. She was 39, but pain had added years around her eyes. Her dark hair was pulled back loosely. One hand rested on the armrest, the fingers slightly curled as if gripping took effort. She turned when Julian entered. For a second, neither of them spoke. Her gaze moved over his face with careful attention. Not admiration, not surprise exactly. Recognition without certainty. "You look like Robert," she said. Julian stopped in the doorway. The words hit harder than expected. He had spent his life being told he carried himself like Robert Ashford. Strong posture, controlled expression, a face that gave little away. But hearing it from Mara felt different. Because she had no reason to flatter him, he stepped inside. "I'm Julian, I know who you are." Her voice was quiet, but not weak. The nurse left them. Julian sat in the chair beside the window. "I only learned your name yesterday." Mara gave a faint smile. "That sounds like Elaine. She protects people by hiding things." There was no bitterness in the sentence, only exhaustion. Julian studied her. "How do you know my mother?" Mara looked out the window. A few cars moved through the parking lot below. "Elaine visited me for years, not often enough to draw attention. Often enough that I knew I wasn't forgotten." Julian swallowed. "And the harbor account?" Her face changed, so she knew. "That was supposed to cover my care," Mara said. "Not just here. Doctors, therapy, transportation, legal paperwork when needed. It was never luxury, just stability. Who controlled it? Graham Porter handled the filings. Elaine approved support. At least that's how it used to work." Julian leaned forward. "What changed 6 months ago?" Mara's fingers tightened against the armrest. Graham said the trust had been frozen for review. Then the facility started sending notices. Elaine came in person. She looked embarrassed, but she paid what she could. Julian closed his eyes briefly. The image formed against his will. Elaine in a cleaning uniform, hands cracked, working nights under a false name, not for herself, for this woman. His anger shifted again. It became heavier, more focused. "Did Vanessa know about you?" he asked. Mara turned from the window. Her expression sharpened. "She came here once." Julian went still. "When?" "About a year ago." "What did she want?" Mara hesitated. "She asked if Elaine was using Ashford money to keep me quiet." Julian felt the room tighten around him. Quiet about what? Mara's eyes searched his face. For the first time she seemed unsure whether to answer. Then she reached toward the small drawer beside her chair and pulled out a folded envelope. "I kept this because I learned a long time ago not to trust powerful people with the only proof I had." Julian took the envelope. Inside was a copy of a letter on old Ashford Foundation letterhead. At the bottom was Graham Porter's signature. The date was 6 months earlier. Julian read the first line. Then his blood went cold. Effective immediately, all disbursements connected to the Ellison Dependent Support Provision are suspended pending review of Julian Ashford's legal status as beneficiary. He looked up slowly. My legal status. Mara held his gaze. That's what Graham said. If anyone opened the old will, it wouldn't just affect me. Julian's hand tightened around the letter. What old will? Mara's voice dropped. The one Robert Ashford changed before he died. Julian stared at Mara for several seconds. The one Robert changed before he died? Mara nodded slowly. The movement seemed to cost her energy. I never saw the whole document, she said. Elaine wouldn't let me. She said some things were too dangerous to carry around. Julian looked down at the letter still resting in his hands. Dangerous, that word kept appearing. Dangerous questions, dangerous documents, dangerous truths. Yet the people who seemed most frightened were never the wealthy ones. It was Elaine, it was Mara, the people with the least power. What exactly did Graham tell you? Julian asked. Mara looked toward the window. He said the review could affect every beneficiary connected to the trust. Beneficiary? Yes. How many people? I don't know. The answer only deepened the mystery. Julian had always assumed the Ashford estate was straightforward. Properties, investments, foundations, charitable giving. Now it sounded like an entire hidden structure existed beneath the surface, one that he knew almost nothing about. Mara seemed to sense his frustration. You should talk to Elaine. I have no. She shook her head. Not as her son. Julian frowned. What does that mean? It means you've been asking questions like someone investigating a crime. The statement landed harder than he expected. Because it was true, Mara continued. You haven't asked what it cost her. Silence settled between them. For the first time, Julian thought about the last 6 months from Elaine's perspective. The frozen payments, the cleaning job, the fear, the exhaustion, all while carrying secrets she clearly believed could destroy something, or someone. When he finally left Harbor Rest, the afternoon sky had darkened with incoming rain. He sat in his car for several minutes before starting the engine. Instead of driving to the hotel, he went somewhere else, the cemetery. Robert Ashford's grave sat beneath an old maple tree overlooking a gentle hillside. Simple, elegant, exactly as Robert would have wanted. Julian stood there alone. He hadn't visited in nearly a year. Business had always provided convenient excuses. Now the excuses felt hollow. He stared at the name engraved into the stone. Robert Ashford, a man he had respected, a man who had changed his life, a man who apparently carried far more secrets than Julian had ever imagined. You left a mess behind. The words escaped before he realized he had spoken them aloud. Rain began falling lightly. Small drops at first, then more. Julian remained where he was. A strange thought had taken hold. What if Graham wasn't hiding the will because of money? What if he was hiding something written inside it? Something connected to Mara, something connected to Elaine, or something connected to him. That possibility followed him all the way back to the hotel. When he arrived, Elaine was waiting in the lobby, not upstairs, not in her room, waiting. The moment she saw him, she stood. You went to see her. Julian nodded. Elaine closed her eyes briefly. Not angry, resigned. She told me about the will. The color drained from Elaine's face. For a moment, she looked like she might collapse. Julian immediately stepped forward. Mom, she steadied herself. I told her not to. You told her not to tell me? I told everyone. Her voice broke. Everyone. The word echoed. Julian guided her toward a chair. She sat slowly. For several moments, neither spoke. The hotel lobby buzzed quietly around them, but neither seemed to notice. Finally, Elaine looked at him. You think I'm protecting myself, aren't you? A sad smile appeared. No, that answer came without hesitation. No, not maybe, not partly. No, Julian felt the certainty in it. Whatever Elaine was hiding, she truly believed she was protecting someone else. Then who are you protecting? Her eyes immediately filled with tears. Again, always tears when the conversation reached this point. But this time she answered, Mara. The honesty surprised him. Why? Elaine looked away. Because she's suffered enough. The answer made no sense, at least not yet. Mara isn't the one freezing trust accounts. I know she isn't the one forging documents. I know she isn't the one forcing you to work nights. Elaine lowered her head. No, frustration surged through him. Then why? For several seconds she remained silent. Then she whispered something so softly he almost missed it. Because some truths punish the wrong people. The statement hung between them. Julian felt another piece of the puzzle shift. Not enough to reveal the picture, just enough to change its shape. A phone vibrated. Elaine glanced toward her handbag. The expression on her face immediately changed. Fear, raw fear. Julian noticed instantly. "Who is it?" Elaine didn't answer. The phone continued vibrating. Julian reached for it. Elaine grabbed his wrist. Not aggressively, desperately. "Please." That single word froze him. The phone stopped. A missed call notification appeared. Julian saw the name, Graham Porter. His jaw tightened. "Why is he calling you?" Elaine looked trapped. "I don't know." A lie, not a convincing one. Before Julian could press further, the phone rang again. Same caller, same name. This time Julian picked it up before Elaine could stop him. "Julian." The attorney's voice sounded unusually tense, not frightened. "Urgent. How did you get this number?" Julian asked. "Listen carefully." "I think we're past that, Julian." Something in Graham's tone made him pause. The lawyer lowered his voice. "You need to stop digging." Julian almost laughed. "That's not happening. You don't understand what's at stake. Then explain it." Silence. Then Graham spoke carefully. "Some records were never meant to be reopened." Julian's anger rose. "Because they expose you?" "No." The answer came instantly, too instantly. "Then what?" Another pause. Longer this time. When Graham finally spoke, his voice sounded different, less confident, almost worried. "For the first time in years, Elaine is making emotional decisions instead of practical ones." Julian frowned. "What does that mean?" "It means she's preparing to tell you something." The attorney exhaled slowly. "And once she does, there will be no way to undo it." The line went dead. Julian lowered the phone. Across from him, Elaine looked devastated. Not surprised, devastated. As if she already knew exactly what Graham meant. Slowly, she reached into her purse and removed a folded document. Her hands were trembling. "I hoped this day would never come," she whispered. Julian looked at the paper. The heading was partially visible. A court seal, official records, old records, very old records. Then his eyes landed on a single phrase near the top of the first page, "Petition for adult adoption." But beneath his own name was another line, another name. One he had never seen connected to the case before. Mara Ellison. Julian stared at the document as if the words might rearrange themselves into something that made sense. They didn't. His name remained there, so did Mara's, on the same petition. The same filing, the same date. The hotel lobby seemed to fade around him. "What is this?" he asked quietly. Elaine lowered herself back into the chair. The exhaustion in her face looked older than 71 years. It was never finalized. Julian looked up sharply. "What wasn't?" "The original plan." Her voice trembled. "The adoption." For several seconds he simply stared. Nothing fit together. Nothing. "You told me Robert and you adopted me when I was 19. We did. Then why is Mara's name on the paperwork?" Elaine closed her eyes. "Because at one point, Robert wanted both of you included." Julian felt his heartbeat quicken. "Both?" "Yes." The answer hung heavily between them. He looked back at the faded court document. A second adult applicant, Mara Ellison, the same woman sitting in a care facility. The same woman whose support fund had mysteriously disappeared. The same woman connected to Robert's hidden promises. "What happened?" Julian asked. Elaine hesitated. Then she finally made a choice. No more avoiding. No more half answers. The court filing began as a guardianship transition and adoption review for two adults who had no stable family protection at the time. Julian listened carefully. Every word mattered now. Mara agreed. She never knew the entire plan. "What do you mean she never knew?" Elaine rubbed her forehead. Robert kept changing his mind. The statement immediately bothered Julian. His late father had built a business empire worth hundreds of millions. He was not known for uncertainty. Yet somehow he had hesitated here. "Why, what changed his mind?" Elaine looked away. Victor Ellison, the name again. The mysterious business partner. The man whose shadow seemed to touch every secret. He objected. "No." "Then what?" "Victor died." Silence. A painful silence. Not because of the death itself, because of what followed. Julian could see it. The missing pieces, the promises, the guilt, the unfinished paperwork. Everything spiraling after that moment. What did that have to do with Mara? Elaine looked directly at him. Everything. For a moment she seemed ready to continue, then she stopped. Fear again. The same fear that had haunted every conversation. Julian was beginning to hate it. Not because it frustrated him, because it terrified him. Whatever truth existed was powerful enough to frighten Elaine more than poverty, humiliation, or exhaustion, and that meant it was far worse than he had imagined. That evening, Julian returned to Harbor Rest. He hadn't planned to, but the unanswered questions refused to leave him alone. Mara was sitting in the common library when he arrived. A book rested open in her lap. She looked surprised to see him again. "You came back, I need answers." A faint smile crossed her face. "That makes two of us." Julian sat across from her. Outside, rain tapped softly against the windows. The facility was quiet, almost empty, perfect for difficult conversations. "What do you know about Victor Ellison?" The smile disappeared immediately. Mara stared at him. Not shocked, not confused. Guarded, that reaction told him everything. She knew something. Maybe a lot, Mara. She looked down at her hands. "I know what people told me." "What people?" "Lawyers, accountants, charity administrators, not family?" The word seemed to hurt. "No." Julian regretted it instantly, but the damage was already done. Mara exhaled slowly. "Victor was supposed to leave me protected." Supposed to? There were legal problems after he died. What kind? Nobody ever explained them clearly. Julian leaned forward. "Try." She studied him carefully, then nodded. "Some assets disappeared." His eyes narrowed. "Disappeared?" "Transferred." "That was worse. Far worse." "Transferred where? I don't know." The frustration returned. Every answer created 3 new questions. But one thing was becoming obvious. Money was involved. Not ordinary money, legacy money, trust money, inheritance money. Exactly the kind of thing Graham Porter specialized in. Exactly the kind of thing could motivate fraud. What happened after Victor died? Mara looked toward the rain-covered glass. The people who promised to help stopped calling. Julian felt something twist inside him. He knew that feeling. Not personally, but professionally. He had seen it happen. When businesses failed, when fortunes disappeared, when powerful people decided someone no longer mattered, the phone call stopped first, then the invitations, then the support, then the person. "Except Elaine," Mara said quietly. Julian looked back at her. She never stopped. For the first time that day, he saw genuine emotion in Mara's eyes. She kept showing up. The words were simple, but they carried years behind them. She didn't have to. No, she could have walked away. Yes, but she didn't. Mara nodded. No. Julian thought about his mother scrubbing office floors at 2 in the morning, not for herself, for someone everyone else had forgotten. Suddenly his anger shifted again. The mystery mattered. The fraud mattered. The will mattered. But none of it changed who Elaine was, and that realization strengthened his resolve. Someone had exploited her kindness. Someone had counted on her silence. Someone had mistaken compassion for weakness. That mistake was going to cost them. When Julian left Harbor Rest, he didn't drive back to the hotel. Instead, he went directly to Ashford Foundation headquarters. The building was mostly empty at that hour. Only a few lights remained on. His security credentials still worked. Within minutes, he was inside the executive records department. The archives occupied an entire floor. Decades of financial reports, board minutes, trust agreements, donation records. If Victor Ellison's missing assets existed anywhere, traces would remain. Julian worked for nearly 2 hours. Nothing, then another hour. Still nothing. He was preparing to leave when something caught his eye. A reference buried inside an old annual foundation report. One line, one footnote, easy to miss. Special Asset Transfer Authorization, V Legacy Provision. Julian froze. V.E. Victor Ellison. His pulse quickened. He opened the corresponding archive request. Access denied, restricted file, authorization required. That alone was suspicious. But what happened next was worse. The restriction date wasn't old. It had been updated recently, very recently. 6 months ago. The same month Mara's support payments stopped. The same month Graham froze the Harbor account. The same month Elaine started cleaning floors. Julian immediately printed the audit record. Someone had modified access permissions. Someone had deliberately buried the file. And beside the authorization change was a user signature. Not Graham Porter, not Vanessa Bellamy, someone else, someone Julian had never considered. His eyes locked onto the name, Mrs. Eleanor Dalton, the housekeeper. The woman who claimed Elaine had chosen independence. The woman who always looked nervous. The woman everyone assumed was merely a frightened witness. Julian stared at the page, then slowly reached for his phone. Because for the first time he wasn't sure whether Mrs. Dalton was hiding the truth, or helping hide it. Julian remained in the archive room long after everyone else had left. Mrs. Eleanor Dalton, the name sat on the printed audit report like a stain. For days he had treated her as a frightened employee caught between loyalty and fear. Someone who knew more than she admitted, someone who might eventually become a witness. Now he wasn't sure. The access restriction had been changed under her credentials, not Graham's, not Vanessa's, hers. He made copies of every document and locked the originals inside a secure case. Then he called a trusted forensic accountant from his company and arranged a private review of the archive permissions. He wanted facts, not assumptions, not another mystery. By the time he left the building, it was nearly midnight. Rain still covered the city. The streets reflected red traffic lights and storefront signs like broken glass. His phone vibrated. "Elaine," he answered immediately. "Mom?" Her voice sounded tired. "Where are you? Working, Julian." The concern in her voice made him pause. "I found something." Silence. Then she asked the question he least expected. "Was it Mrs. Dalton?" Julian stopped walking. "How did you know?" Another long silence followed. Too long. Finally Elaine sighed. "Because she's been afraid for years." That answer only deepened his suspicion. Afraid of what? Or afraid for whom? The next morning Julian drove to a small house on the edge of town. Mrs. Dalton no longer lived at the estate. Vanessa had quietly moved her into a company-owned property years earlier. Another detail that suddenly felt important. The house itself was modest, a narrow driveway, small garden, peeling white paint. Nothing about it suggested someone secretly controlling trust assets worth millions. Mrs. Dalton opened the door herself. The moment she saw Julian, her face fell. Not surprise, resignation. Almost as though she had been expecting this visit for a very long time. "You found it." Julian didn't bother pretending the archive records. She nodded, then stepped aside. "Come in." The living room was simple and clean, old furniture, framed photographs, bookshelves, the life of an ordinary woman. Yet Julian couldn't ignore the unease tightening inside him. Mrs. Dalton sat slowly. Her hands trembled. Age had made her movements slower, but her eyes remained sharp. "You think I helped steal from your family?" Julian remained standing. "Did you?" "No." The answer came instantly. Without hesitation, without defensiveness. "No." He studied her carefully. People lied all the time. But something about her response felt different. "Then explain the authorization." Mrs. Dalton looked toward a photograph on the wall. A photograph Julian had never seen before. Robert Ashford, Victor Ellison, and a third man standing beside them. The same unidentified man appeared in several old pictures Julian had uncovered recently. His stomach tightened. "Who is that?" Mrs. Dalton followed his gaze. For a moment she looked sad, then she answered, "Thomas Reed." The name meant nothing to Julian, yet somehow it felt important. Everything did now. Mrs. Dalton returned her attention to him. "The authorization wasn't my decision. Your credentials were used, yes." "Then who used them?" She looked away. Graham. Julian's jaw tightened. Finally, something direct. "Why?" He said it was temporary. "Did you believe him?" "No." The honesty surprised him. "Then why agree?" For the first time, genuine shame appeared on her face. "Because I was weak." The answer sounded painfully sincere. Mrs. Dalton folded her hands together. 20 years ago, Robert helped my husband after a bankruptcy nearly destroyed us. I spent my entire career believing I owed the Ashford family loyalty." She laughed bitterly. "A dangerous thing to owe people." Julian listened quietly. Graham knew that. The pieces were beginning to fit. "He threatened you?" "No." Her expression darkened. "That would have been easier." "What did he do?" "He convinced me I was protecting Elaine." Julian frowned. "How?" Mrs. Dalton stared at the floor. "Because there was another document." Every nerve in Julian's body seemed to tighten. Another document, always another document, another secret, another layer. What document? Mrs. Dalton stood slowly and walked toward a cabinet. After a moment she returned carrying a thin envelope. Worn, sealed, "I never opened it." She handed it to him. It belonged to Robert. Julian took it carefully. The envelope contained a single folded page, a memorandum typed, signed, dated only months before Robert's death. Julian read quickly, then stopped. "Read again." The room suddenly felt smaller. The memorandum referenced a codicil, an amendment to the will, a missing amendment. His pulse accelerated. "Where did you get this?" "Robert gave it to me." Julian stared at her. "Why?" Mrs. Dalton swallowed. "Because he was afraid." The answer shocked him. Robert Ashford. Afraid, the words barely belonged together. Afraid of what? Mrs. Dalton hesitated, then spoke carefully. Of what would happen after he was gone. Julian looked back at the paper. The memorandum referenced protected beneficiaries, plural, not singular, multiple people, and one line immediately stood out. In the event of my death, authority regarding the dependent support provisions shall remain exclusively under Elaine Ashford's discretion. Julian felt his heart pound. Exclusively. Not Graham, not trustees, not attorneys. Elaine, which meant someone had intentionally removed her authority. Someone had overridden Robert's instructions. Someone had altered the balance of power. Why didn't you give this to Elaine? Mrs. Dalton's eyes filled with tears. Because Graham told me the codicil itself had been destroyed. Julian froze. Destroyed. The word echoed in his mind. Not lost. Destroyed. A deliberate act. Mrs. Dalton looked devastated. I believed him. Julian folded the document carefully. For the first time, he no longer saw her as a suspect. He saw her as another frightened person manipulated by someone who understood exactly how to weaponize loyalty. There's something else, she said quietly. Julian looked up. Her hands trembled harder now. What? Mrs. Dalton walked toward a locked drawer. She removed a small key, then opened a metal box. Inside were several documents. Most appeared ordinary. Financial records, correspondence, old meeting notes. Then she pulled out a photograph. The moment Julian saw it, his breath caught. It was another picture of Robert, Victor Thomas Reed, and Elaine. But that wasn't what shocked him. A handwritten note covered the back. The ink had faded with age, yet one sentence remained clearly visible. If anything happens to me, Thomas knows the truth about Mara. Julian slowly lowered the photograph. The room had become completely silent. Who was Thomas Reed? He asked. Mrs. Dalton looked frightened again. Not guilty. Terrified, because this secret was older, bigger, more dangerous. He was the only person Robert trusted with the original codicil. Julian's pulse quickened. Where is he now, Mrs. Dalton's face went pale. Then she whispered the answer. He disappeared 3 weeks after Robert's funeral, and for the first time since this nightmare began, Julian realized the missing will might not be the only thing that had vanished. 3 months later, the truth finally reached daylight. It did not happen in a courtroom. It happened in a packed board meeting at the Ashford Foundation. The room was filled with trustees, attorneys, auditors, and long-time donors, people who had trusted the foundation's reputation for years. Julian stood at one end of the table. Elaine sat beside him. For the first time in a long time, she looked neither frightened nor exhausted. She looked ready. The investigation had taken weeks. Financial records were reviewed. Trust documents were verified. Archived filings were recovered. The missing codicil had never been destroyed. Thomas Reed had hidden it before disappearing, fearing exactly what eventually happened. After his death years later, the document had remained inside a private legal archive until forensic investigators connected it to the Ashford estate. When the codicil was finally authenticated, everything changed. Robert Ashford had clearly stated that Elaine alone would oversee the dependent support provisions connected to the estate. The trust existed specifically to protect vulnerable adults connected to obligations Robert believed he owed. Mara was one of them. Not because of inheritance, because of responsibility. The trust had never been intended as charity, it had been intended as restitution. Graham Porter had quietly removed Elaine's authority after Robert's death. Over time, he redirected administrative fees, concealed records, and buried the codicil beneath layers of legal paperwork. Vanessa had entered much later. She had not created the fraud, but she had benefited from it, and once she learned Elaine was losing influence, she chose to isolate her rather than question what was happening. The consequences came swiftly. Graham faced professional disciplinary proceedings and multiple civil actions connected to his management of the trust. His reputation collapsed long before any court ruling could arrive. Vanessa lost access to the estate, the foundation's circles, and the social status she had spent years protecting. But the greatest consequence for both of them was simpler. The truth no longer belonged to them. It belonged to the people they had tried to silence. When the final evidence was presented, no one spoke for several moments. Then Elaine did something Julian never expected. She stood, slowly, calmly, without anger, without revenge. For years people had spoken for her, explained her decisions, questioned her judgment, dismissed her voice. Now she spoke for herself. She explained how the support fund worked, how Mara's care depended on it, how she signed documents she believed were temporary, how she trusted people she should not have trusted, and how, when the money disappeared, she chose to work rather than abandon someone who depended on her. The room listened in complete silence, not because she was powerful, because she was honest. When she finished, several people lowered their eyes, others wiped away tears. Julian realized something then. His mother had never been the weakest person in the room. She had been the strongest. Weeks later, Vanessa requested a meeting. Elaine agreed, only once. The conversation lasted less than an hour. Vanessa arrived without designer clothes, assistance, or excuses. She brought a handwritten letter, not a legal statement, not a defense, an apology. She admitted her resentment, her jealousy, her belief that Elaine looked down on her because she came from a poorer background. She admitted that every humiliation she imagined became an excuse to justify real cruelty. Elaine listened quietly. When Vanessa finished, neither woman spoke for a long moment. Finally, Vanessa asked the question she had carried there. "Can you forgive me?" Elaine looked at her gently, but she shook her head. "Not today." Vanessa lowered her eyes. The answer hurt, yet she accepted it, because for the first time she understood that forgiveness wasn't something owed, it was something earned, and sometimes it took longer than regret. The letter remained with Elaine after Vanessa left. She kept it, not because everything was fixed, because honesty mattered, even when it arrived late. Mara's future also changed. The trust was restored through proper oversight. Independent administrators replaced the old structure. Her medical care stabilized. The uncertainty that had followed her for years finally began to lift. For the first time, she could make plans without wondering whether support would disappear overnight. Julian visited often, not out of obligation, out of choice, and little by little, the distance between strangers became something closer to family. As for Julian and Elaine, healing proved slower. The secrets had left scars, the lies had left questions. Some conversations were difficult, some silences remained, but they stopped hiding from each other. That mattered more than either of them expected. Several months later, Julian sold the lakefront estate. Too many painful memories remained there. Instead, he purchased a smaller home overlooking the ocean. Quiet, warm, peaceful. Most importantly, it belonged entirely to Elaine. Her name stood alone on every document. No hidden clauses, no trustees, no conditions. When Julian handed her the final paperwork, she stared at it for several seconds. Then she laughed softly through tears. "You really did it. You earned it." Elaine shook her head. No, she looked directly at him. "We earned it." The words stayed with him because they were true. One evening near sunset, Julian sat beside her on the back porch. The ocean rolled gently beyond the garden. A small wooden table stood between them. Not expensive, not impressive, just old. The kind of thing most people would replace. Elaine ran a cloth across its surface. Julian grabbed another cloth and helped. Neither spoke for a while. They simply worked together. Not because they had to, not because survival depended on it, because they were building a home. Finally, Elaine smiled. "You know," she said, "for a man who owns aerospace companies, you're not very good at polishing furniture." Julian laughed. "I'm learning." She squeezed his hand. The gesture was small, but after everything they had survived, it meant more than any inheritance ever could. The sun slowly disappeared beyond the water. Golden light covered the porch. And for the first time since stepping off that private jet, Julian felt something he had almost forgotten: peace. Elaine leaned back in her chair and smiled toward the horizon. "Next time you come home," she said softly, "don't surprise me. Just come home." If this story reminded you to check on someone you love, leave a comment and share it with someone who needs to hear it.